Go out to Third Mesa in northern Arizona on a clear night, walk to the edge of the old village of Oraibi, and look up. There is almost no light out there. No cities close enough to smudge the sky, no highway glow along the horizon. Just the stone houses, some of them 900 years old, and above them one of the darkest skies left anywhere in North America, packed so thick with stars that the familiar shapes almost drown in the crowd of them. People have been standing on that exact ledge of rock, looking up at that exact sky, for longer than almost any other place on this continent has been lived in at all. And the title that brought you here says, "One of those stars came down," that a star fell over Oraibi and never left. I want to tell you where that idea comes from, and I want to be honest with you about it, because the honest version is the one worth your time. So let me tell you what I actually did. I went and read the record, the real one, the old books where this tradition was written down, by men who sat with Hopi people more than 100 years ago and asked them, patiently, what they knew about the sky. The main one is a book called The Traditions of the Hopi. It was collected by a man named Henry Voth and published in 1905 by the Field Columbian Museum in Chicago. Voth lived at Oraibi for years. He learned the language, and he wrote down story after story from Hopi men he named on the page, one by one. Working the same mesas in the same years was Jesse Walter Fuchs, sent by the Bureau of American Ethnology, who spent his seasons recording how the Hopi watched the heavens and kept their calendar and timed their ceremonies by the sun and the stars. Between the two of them, we have a genuine written record of what the Hopi at Oraibi said about the sky, set down while the people who carried that knowledge were still alive to give it. And here is what I have to tell you, right at the start, before we go one step further. I went looking in that record for the star in the title, the one said to have come down over Oraibi and stayed, and what I found instead is stranger, and richer, and in some ways sadder than that. So I am going to show you exactly what the Hopi said about the stars, who said it, and the men who wrote it down. And every single time we cross the line from something you could walk up and put your hand on, a real village, a real book, a real man, into the legend itself, I am going to stop and tell you, so you always know which side of that line we are standing on. Because that line is the whole story here. Let me start with the ground under our feet, because it is real, and it is astonishing on its own. Oraibi is one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in the entire United States. People have lived there, on that same narrow shelf of Third Mesa, since somewhere around the year 1100. Sit with what that means. When the first families were setting the first stones at Oraibi, the great cathedrals of Europe had not been raised yet. The Crusades had not happened yet. And that village simply kept going, through drought and war and centuries, all the way into the present day. In the late 1200s, when a run of brutal droughts hollowed out smaller villages all across the region, Oraibi was one of the places people gathered to, and it grew into the most important town on the Hopi Mesas. None of that is legend, that is archaeology and record. You can drive there, it is still standing. So this is a people with one of the longest unbroken views of the night sky of anyone on Earth, and they did not just glance at it, they read it, closely, as a working part of their lives. That is where I want to begin, because it is the part of this whole story that is most solid, most documented, and honestly, most impressive. Before we go anywhere near a falling star, you need to understand how carefully the Hopi watched the real ones, and the sun besides. Start with the sun, because the Hopi did. From the earliest careful records, the ones Fuchs and another patient observer named Alexander Stephen were making back in the 1890s, we know that the Hopi ran their year by watching exactly where the sun came up and went down along the horizon. This was not casual. Certain men held the office of sun watcher, and their job was to stand at a known spot and mark the sunrise against the jagged line of the distant land, against particular notches and peaks and points that everyone recognized. As the sun crept along that horizon through the year, it passed those landmarks like the hand of a clock passing the hours. When it reached a certain point, it was time to plant. When it reached another, it was time to begin a certain ceremony. The Hopi had names for these horizon markers. The land itself was the calendar, and the sun was the pointer moving across it. And the watching of it was a sacred act, not a chore. Fuchs recorded a sun priest keeping the solstice at a sun shrine on the mesas, and the details he set down are quiet and exact. Before dawn, the priest planted prayer feathers at the back of the shrine. Then he sat, facing the place where the sun would come up, and he waited in the cold and the dark. And when the sun finally cleared the horizon, he cast sacred cornmeal toward it, out across the feathers and off to the east, the way you would greet someone you had been waiting all night to see. That is what it looked like to keep the sky at Oraibi and the villages around it. A man alone before first light, offering cornmeal to a rising star that happens to be our own. And the most important moment of that whole solar year came in the dead of winter, at the solstice, the shortest day, when the sun reaches the far end of its journey along the horizon and seems, for a few days, to stop. The Hopi held a great ceremony there, called soil, to help turn the sun back and start the world moving through another year. It was so important that its leadership fell to the highest men in the village, and here is the detail that ties all of this straight back to our ground. Voth, the same man who collected the traditions, also sat through that winter ceremony at Oraibi and wrote a long, careful account of it, published in 1901. The Oraibi winter solstice, documented, by name, on the page. This is not a vague notion that the Hopi liked the sky. This is a specific village running a specific sacred calendar off the movement of the sun, recorded in detail while it was happening. Now bring the night into it, because this is where the stars do their work. In the deep of winter, through the long ceremonies that ran across whole nights, the priests down inside the kiva did not guess at how much of the night had passed. They measured it, by the stars. And here I need to ground one word for you, because it matters. A kiva is a Hopi ceremonial chamber, partly sunk down into the earth, and you enter it from above, climbing down a ladder through an opening in the roof. That roof opening is also a framed window onto the sky, and during those winter nights, the men below watched particular stars cross that opening overhead, and read from them how far the night had run, and when the next part of the ritual had to begin. 2 star groups did most of that work, and this is the part worked out most carefully by a historian of astronomy named Stephen McCluskey, who went back through the notes of Fuchs and Stephen to reconstruct it. One group was the Pleiades, that tight little knot of stars most people can find even in a bright sky once they know where to look. The other was the belt of Orion, the 3 bright stars in a short straight row that hang over the whole of the winter world. The Hopi had their own names for both, names the ethnographers wrote down as best they could catch them by ear, and they tracked them with real precision. When the Pleiades stood in the frame of that roof opening, it meant one thing. When Orion followed, it meant another. The timing of a night ceremony, the moment the singing turned, the point where a new set of prayers began, could hang on exactly where those stars sat in that square of open sky. Let that land for a second, because it is easy to rush past. These were people who knew the winter sky so well and trusted it so completely that they ran their holiest nights by it, like a clock nobody could wind and nobody could stop. The Pleiades were even painted onto the wall of at least one kiva, set right into the sacred space itself. The stars were not scenery to the Hopi. They were part of how the world was ordered, and how time was kept, and how the year was held together and handed on. That is the real, documented Hopi relationship with the heavens, and you needed it in your hands before we go any further, because everything after this rests on it. So the Hopi read the stars, and the sun, with the care of astronomers. But where did they say the stars had come from in the first place? Here we step over the line, out of the record of what people did, and into the legend of how things began. And the answer Voth wrote down is not a solemn one at all. It is almost mischievous. The Hopi tell of a long wandering, back when the clans were still journeying across the world in search of the place they were meant to settle. That whole tradition, the worlds that are said to have come before this one, and the climb up into this one, is an enormous story in its own right, and it is not the one I am telling tonight. I am pulling a single thread out of it, the thread about the stars. Because tucked inside the story of the wandering, the Hopi said the stars had not always been up in the sky. For a while they were carried, and the one carrying them was Coyote. Coyote turns up all through the old stories of this whole region, and he is nearly always trouble. Impatient, greedy, the one who cannot leave a thing alone. And in the telling Voth set down, it was Coyote who had the stars, holding them in his hand as the people traveled. Until, the story says, he simply threw them up into the sky. Voth writes it plainly, The coyote who had carried the stars in his hand threw the stars into the sky, so that from that time it was somewhat light during the night. That is the whole account. No ceremony, no careful design, no map of the constellations. A restless animal flings a fistful of stars upward out of boredom, and from that night on, the dark had a little light in it. If you have ever heard the idea that the stars ended up scattered across the heavens in no real order, this is the Hopi form of it, and it is old, and it is theirs, and it fits coyote exactly. There is a second thread too, from a different teller in the same collection, and it points somewhere gentler. In one of the origin accounts, given to Voth by a man from the village of Shupaulavi, he was told that far off in the west, on a small piece of land in the middle of an endless water, there lived a being called Huruing Wuchti. She was the woman of the hard substances, of all the precious solid things, the shells and the corals and the beads. And this teller said that she owned the moon and the stars. Now Voth, who was a careful man, added a note right there in his own hand. He wrote that this was the only time he ever heard them spoken of as being owned by Huruing Wuchti. He is telling you, in his own footnote, that this was not the common account. He heard it once, from one man, and he wrote it down anyway, because that is what you do with the truth. You record it as it comes to you, even the version you only ever hear a single time. I genuinely love that he did that. It is the whole difference between a record and a story someone is selling you. Voth is not smoothing the Hopi sky down into one tidy myth for an easier read. He is showing you that the tradition had many voices inside it, some of them disagreeing with each other, the way any living body of knowledge always does. So the stars were flung up by coyote, or owned by the woman in the west. Take your pick. The record holds both, and does not force them to agree. But there was one star in particular that the Hopi singled out from all the rest. And this is where the sky stops being scenery and becomes something you kneel down and pray to. In the long tradition of the wandering, the one where the clans race across the world to see who will reach the place of the sunrise first, there is a star that carries a message. The story says that when the first of the traveling people finally reached the far eastern edge of the world, the place where the sun comes up, a star rose in the south as the sign that someone had arrived. It was a signal all the groups had agreed on before they ever set out, a way of telling the ones still walking that the race was over. And here is the part that reaches all the way forward into Voth's own present. He writes that this star was said to have influence over the animals, and that the old people said whoever wanted to own a horse, or cattle, or sheep, should pray to this star. And then he adds 4 words that change how you hear the whole thing, which the Hopi, he writes, are doing to this day. To this day. Voth is writing in 1905, and he is telling you, this is not a dead myth about the ancient past. This is a living practice happening around him as he writes it down. Right then, at the turn of the century, there were Hopi people at Oraibi who looked up to a particular star low in the southern sky and prayed to it for their herds. The legend of how that star got its meaning was old, older than anyone could count. The prayer was present tense. That is the seam of this whole story, right there in a single phrase. A tale out of the deep past, and a person kneeling under a real star tonight, both held in the same hand at the same time. The Hopi lived on that seam constantly, and Voth was honest enough to write down both halves of it and let you see the join. And notice what kind of thing a star had become. It was something you could turn to when you needed anything as ordinary and as vital as a horse to carry your family, or sheep to get you through the winter. In that tradition, the sky was close, and it was involved, and it could be asked. A person out at Oraibi who wanted to build up a herd looked to a particular star and prayed for it. That is a sky that has been lived under, and worked under, and leaned on, for a very long time. If you're new here, and enjoying this kind of historical depth, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now I want to tell you about 2 stars that chase each other across the sky, because this is the closest the Hopi record comes to giving a star a face, and a name, and a story with an ending. Voth set this one down as its own tale, about how a certain Katsina and his wife became stars. And I should stop and say what a Katsina is, because it sits at the center of Hopi religion. The Katsinam are the spirit beings of the Hopi world, the powers behind the rain and the corn and the seasons, honored in the great masked dances in the plazas, and they can cross between our world and theirs. So a story about a Katsina becoming a star is not a small folk tale about talking animals. It is a story about one of the sacred beings taking his place, permanently, up in the sky. This one grows out of the flute ceremony, one of the old Hopi rites. And like a good many of these stories, it is really about doing a sacred thing exactly right, or failing to. In the account, there is a married pair, and there are the flute priests, and at the close of a long story, the two of them are brought together for a final test. The priests place the man and the woman back to back. They lay down a road of sacred cornmeal for each one road running out to the south and the other out to the north, and they tell the pair to walk 4 steps along their own road, and then turn, and come back together to meet. It is a small thing. 4 steps out, then turn, then back. But the man does not do it right. He turns back after only 3 steps instead of 4, 1 step short. And the flute priests, who had been watching every move, are angry, because the sacred pattern has been broken, and a broken pattern cannot simply be swept up and mended. They call out to the woman to run. She runs, and her husband runs after her, and the priests tell them that this is how it will be for them now, forever. You shall always follow each other this way, they say. And the two of them go running off toward the west, and, in the exact words Voth wrote down, they are still running that way. They became the 2 stars the Hopi called Nangasohu, the stars that pursue each other across the heavens, one always chasing the other, sometimes gaining, sometimes slipping behind, night after night with no end to it, because a man once turned back a single step too soon. I think that is a genuinely beautiful piece of sky lore, and I want you to notice what kind of story it actually is. There is no warning in it about the end of the world, no prophecy of doom. It is the oldest kind of star story there is, the kind almost every people on Earth has some version of, where you look up at 2 lights moving through the dark, and you explain them with a story about who they used to be, and what they did, and why they cannot rest. The Greeks did it with their heroes and hunters. Peoples on every continent did it. And so did the Hopi, at Oraibi, and Voth caught it on the page before it could slip out of the world. 2 people, 1 broken step, and a chase with no ending, written up into the stars where anyone can still go and see it. There is one more sky figure in Voth's pages that I have to introduce you to, and I want to be careful here, because this is a spot where the modern confusion creeps in. In one of the war stories, a young man needs help to rescue his sister, and an old war chief takes up a bone whistle, walks outside, and whistles upward toward the sky. And down out of the sky, at once, comes a small man. Voth names him. This, he writes, was the star and cloud deity, living in the sky. In the Hopi tongue, the name is written down as Kotuk Vnangwu. He is a being of the star and the storm cloud together, of the light above and the rain, and in the story he agrees to come down and lend his power to a man in trouble. That is what the old record says. A sky being, tied to the stars and the rain, who could be called down to help a person in need. I point him out on purpose, because if you have read anything modern about the Hopi in the sky, you may have run into a very similar sounding name, attached to enormous cosmic claims about world ages and destruction, and the end of everything that is. Hold that thought for a minute. We are going to deal with exactly where that came from, and it is not where people say it is. For right now, just hold on to what Voth actually wrote, which is small and specific and human-sized. A star and cloud being whistled down out of the night to help a young man go and rescue his sister. That is the deity in the real record. There is no apocalypse hanging off him. So let me gather up what we have. We have the Hopi watching the real sun and the real stars to run their sacred year. We have Coyote flinging the stars up into the dark out of impatience. We have a star in the south that people prayed to for their herds, in Voth's own lifetime. We have 2 stars locked into an endless chase. And we have the small man from the sky who comes down when a man whistles for him. In all of that, in the entire documented Hopi tradition of the sky, is there anywhere a star that fell over Oraibi and stayed? There is exactly one place in Voth's whole book where a star comes down out of the sky and lands on the earth. And I have to be honest with you about what it is, because it is not what the title promises, and that difference is the entire point of this video. It comes in a war story, a Hopi account of a raid on a Navajo dance, and the Hopi are telling it from their own side. A large gathering of Navajo, the story says, had come together in a deep canyon, somewhere north of where Fort Defiance would later stand, for a night of Katsina dancing. They lived well there. Good homes, peach orchards close by, plenty of food laid out. They had ridden in on their ponies, kicking up a heavy dust across the country, the women in blue dresses with red borders and silver belts, and gone down into the canyon by a steep, dangerous, zigzag trail. They camped in a great circle, with their fires burning, and in the center of that circle the dancing went on through the night. There were a great many dancers, Voth notes, wearing the masks of the Katsinas. It was a full ceremony, deep in a canyon, in the firelight, far from anywhere. And then, in the words Voth recorded, when they were performing the fifth dance, a light was seen in the distance, and a big star was rising that came down and fell down near the line of dancers, right in front of the head dancer. A star came down out of the sky and fell, right in front of the lead dancer, in the firelight, in the middle of the ceremony. But listen closely to what it meant, and to whom. The Navajo, the story says, are very much afraid of a thing like that, of an omen dropping out of the heavens into the heart of a dance. So when the star fell, they broke. They jumped on their ponies and scattered in fear. And that was the exact moment a great noise went up from the west of the camp, because the raiders had come. It was the Oraibi, arrived to make their raid, and in the panic and confusion after the falling star, they came down on the dance and drove the Navajo up and out of the canyon. That is the one falling star in the whole record. One. And look hard at what it actually is. It is not a star that fell on Oraibi. It is a star that fell on somebody else, watched by the Oraibi, as they came over the ridge in the dark to raid. It is an omen, a flash of dread, the sort of sign that empties a camp in a heartbeat, and it lasts a single moment, and then it is gone into the ground. There is even a small coda in Voth's own summary of the tale. This, it notes, is the reason the Navajo, when they dance, always keep watchers posted now. A falling star, in this Hopi telling, is not a wonder that settles gently over your village and stays with you forever. It is a warning that lands in the enemy's fire and sends them running for their lives. So I owe you the plain truth now, because I promised it to you at the very start. I went through the documented Hopi record of the sky, the traditions collected at Oraibi by Voth, the ceremonial star watching recorded by Fuchs and by Stephen, and reconstructed by McCluskey, the winter solstice at Oraibi that Voth himself sat through and set down, and nowhere in any of it is there the fallen star the title promises, the one that dropped onto that village and stayed. It simply is not there. The Hopi sky is full, far fuller than almost anyone gives it credit for. It has a star you pray to for your animals. It has two stars caught in an endless chase. It has a being who comes down out of the sky when he is whistled for. It has the Pleiades keeping time in the roof of a kiva, and the sun walking the horizon like the hand of a clock, and Coyote scattering the rest of the stars across the dark. But that one specific image in the title, a single star, come down over that one village, and staying there, is not something the old Hopi at Oraibi ever told Voth, or Fuchs, or anyone else who was writing it down while the tellers were still alive to be asked. So where does it come from? Because an idea like that comes from somewhere, and this is the part you deserve to have laid out straight. There is a famous modern piece of Hopi sky prophecy. You have very likely heard of it. It is called the Blue Star Kachina, or by the Hopi word Sakwasohu, and the story runs that when a blue star appears in the heavens and its spirit comes to dance in the village plaza, the present world is coming to its end. It gets repeated everywhere. It gets pinned onto comets, onto the ends of calendars, onto every passing scare in the sky, and it certainly sounds ancient. But here is what the record actually shows. The Blue Star Kachina, by that name, does not appear anywhere in the old ethnography. It is not in Voth. It is not in Fuchs. It shows up, for the first time that anyone has ever been able to find, in a book called The Book of the Hopi, written by Frank Waters and published in 1963. That is nearly 60 years after Voth was sitting at Oraibi, writing the stars down. The researcher Jason Colavito went looking, carefully and specifically, for any reference to a Blue Star Kachina before Waters put it into print, and he could not turn up a single one. His conclusion is that it is most likely a creation of the late 20th century. The earliest thread anyone can trace runs back only to a pamphlet from 1958, built on a single roadside conversation, and it carries a strongly Christian, end-of-the-world flavor that does not match the older Hopi material at all. And the scholar Armin Geertz, who gave much of his career to Hopi religion, made the point that Hopi prophecy tends to be remade to fit the fears of the present moment, which is exactly what you would expect of something that is alive, and exactly why you cannot read today's version back onto 1905. I am not telling you the blue star means nothing to anyone. For a great many people it clearly means a very great deal, and I am not here to take that from them. But it is a modern thing. It is not the old documented tradition of Oraibi. It is not what Voth or Fuchs wrote down from the men who knew. And it would be dishonest of me to hand it to you as ancient Hopi star lore. So I am setting it gently to one side and telling you plainly what it is and what it is not. And while we are clearing the ground, let me say what this is also not. It is not that other thing you may have collided with online, the old newspaper tale about a hidden city full of treasure under the Grand Canyon. That was a newspaper hoax from more than 100 years ago, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with Hopi tradition. And it is not visitors from other worlds. Nobody in Voth's pages is describing a spacecraft. When the Hopi spoke of a being who came down out of the sky when he was called, they were speaking of a spirit, in a spirit world, in their own religious terms, exactly as their neighbors and their ancestors understood such beings. Turning that into a machine out of the sky is not reading the Hopi. It is talking over them and putting foreign words into the mouths of a people who left us their actual words, on the actual page, if only we would sit down and read them. So let me bring us back to what is real, and to the thing I think that title is truly reaching for, even if it does not quite know it. The pressure on this knowledge was enormous, and it was not a cover-up, and it was not a conspiracy. It was quieter and heavier than any of that. It was time. It was the boarding schools that took Hopi children far from home, cut their hair, forbade their language, and taught them the old knowledge was only superstition to be unlearned. A boy who spends his years being told the stars are nothing does not grow into the man who watches them from the kiva roof. It was the long grind of a century that had less and less room in it for a person whose whole calling was to know which star meant the singing should turn, and when the sun had reached the marker that said begin, even Oraibi itself was pulled almost to breaking over it. In 1906, just after Voth had finished his work, the village tore in two in a bitter split over exactly these questions: how much of the old way to hold, and how much of the new world to let in, and one faction walked out to found a new village a few miles off. That is the real threat to a tradition like this one. It was never a villain guarding a secret in a vault, only the slow, grinding loss of the people who carried it, one keeper of the sky at a time, until the chain of hands finally breaks. And that is exactly why what Voth and Fuchs did matters as much as it does. They got there in the last years, when the men who held these things could still speak them aloud. Voth wrote the names down. He tells you a story of the wandering came from a man he calls Ukioma, of Oraibi. Another came from a man named Wikvaya, of Oraibi. The account of the woman in the west who owned the moon and the stars came from a named man of Shupal-Lavi. These were not anonymous legends drifting in the air. They were specific men, at specific villages, who chose to hand what they knew to an outsider with a notebook, so that it would not go dark when they did. And most of it would have gone dark. Almost everything any people knows eventually does. The only reason we can stand at Oraibi tonight and know that the Pleiades once told the priests when to turn the song is that somebody thought to write it down in time. Before we close, if these old stories and the people who first wrote them down are what you came for, the final boss tier at $9.99 gets you members-only videos plus your name in upcoming uploads. Boss tier at $4.99 for early access. Link in the description. Thanks for watching to the end. So did a star fall over Oraibi and never leave? No, not in the record the Hopi themselves left us. The one star that falls in that record falls on someone else, as an omen of dread, and it is gone by morning. But something did stay over Oraibi, and it is far bigger than a single star. It is the whole sky, and the 900 years of people who read it. The Hopi at Oraibi never needed one star to fall and stay, because they never lost the rest of them. They kept the Pleiades in the roof of the kiva, and the chasing stars running west, and the star low in the south you pray to for your herds, and the sun walking its markers along the winter horizon. They kept a whole ordered heaven, and a way of living underneath it, on the oldest inhabited ground in the country. A single star that dropped from the sky and lodged over one village would be a wonder for a night. What the Hopi held onto was the entire sky, read and named and prayed to, generation after generation, and the star that never left Oraibi was really all of them at once. The people who still knew their names were standing right there, looking up, when a man with a notebook finally came and thought to ask. And that is the best reason I know to go and read what they said, while the words are still on the page, exactly as they gave them.